Hello and welcome to, can you believe it's episode 3, Paul? Episode 3 of Shamps and Property Oddbods, talking about all the week's news in property, the housing market and the property industry itself. So we will now dissect that. How's your week, Paul?
All good. I've had a haircut. I'm really delighted. I've got my hair cut, which I've been waiting for. I had someone cut my hair, but yeah, no, all good, all good.
Do that at social distance then? Did they do it with like a pair of scissors on the end of a stick or something?
They did, no, garden shears. Yeah, it was a bit tricky at times, but yeah, it was all good.
So, fairly busy week for property, as it always is, really. Lots of speculation in the news about what's happening, what isn't happening, so maybe we'll dig into that. Not much data, actually, so I don't think we've had anything in the way of official data from the ONS and so on. I thought we were going to see nationwide numbers out this morning, so Friday morning as we're recording this, but they have been delayed apparently till Tuesday. I think those numbers, Paul, are going to be very interesting indeed, because they're going to take a proper snapshot of activity in April and early May, late April and early May, which obviously is kind of, amidst lockdown and probably the lowest point of the property market in terms of transactions that we've seen for many a year. So what the nationwide are going to make of that will be very interesting to see in terms of what the effect on prices has been of the current crisis. So,
I mean, I spoke to an agent yesterday, and he's got a large business, and he said slowly but surely it's getting back to normal.
Yeah, no, it is. And I want to talk about that because I feel I'm getting a bit closer to earning 100 quid out of you, or rather a charity of my choice, Paul.
I don't know, you keep digging it up on social media, and it's he who laughs last. We're only in week 3. There's a long way to May, and I'm very confident.
Down every hour of that 49 weeks, Paul.
I know, you'll be on me like a rash.
Right, so what should we talk about? Big stories of the week. One that did get away. Obviously, the media has been somewhat distracted by, should we say, the comings and goings of...
The comings and goings. I mean, that's just ludicrous, isn't it, what he's been up to?
So the media have been absolutely obsessed by that. So one thing that slipped through the net, much to probably the relief of the Housing Secretary, was Robert Jenrick. I don't know if you saw this week. He's been hauled over the coals for having to do a U-turn, whereby he, as Secretary of State for Housing, allowed a development in the East End of London, I think down towards Wapping, to go ahead, which was a £1 billion development owned by the one and only Richard Desmond. And Robert Jenrick has been forced to change his decision on that on the basis that there was some bias proven or admitted to, in that the decision by Jenrick is alleged to have been made far too quickly, and was made very quickly, so that it allowed Mr. Desmond off the hook insofar as a load of what they call SIL payments, community infrastructure levy payments, and about 50 million quid's worth. So that actually in a normal week would have been quite big news, I think, for a member of the cabinet with such a big responsibility for housing, not only having to change his mind publicly, but doing it on the basis that he has admitted to bias in favour of the developer. I mean, that's a big thing, right? That's a big thing.
Yeah, and it went to court, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, and now Tower Hamlets Council are suing the Housing Secretary for his actions. So that's in an age of democracy, accountability, and the low point of trust in politicians, I have to say, I thought that was that was a remarkable turn of affairs, really. Anything on your side?
Yes, I've got a couple of stories. I wanted to mention about the launch of the Property Education Bureau accreditation scheme. So people students pay for property education advice, and learning with regard to investment. And it's been like the Wild West, it really has. And then, of course, you get these self-confessed property gurus that, build these portfolios. There's a fine line. And I've been involved in it. I remember I did a talk with Kate Falk in 2008 to beware property sharks, because I used to get contacted by people that were losing money on joint ventures, and they signed in all these false promises. So they've now set up some form of accreditation. I'm sitting on the advisory council with other people in the industry to offer the consumer some protection. And I've also got our sister company, the Property Redress Scheme, to offer redress for consumers. If they're unhappy with the education they get, there is some sort of recourse. So it's the first step of self-regulation, which is going to be a good thing. And that, unfortunately, was on the back of a really tragic story of a chap called Danny Butcher, and it was on the BBC, who sadly took his own life because he wanted to get a refund back from a course he went with Samuel Leeds, and they refused to. And he got in debt, and he was suffering depression. It was a really, really tragic story, and I think it took something as bad as that for something to happen. But it's the first step. We need enforcement on it.
Yeah. Did you notice as well? I don't know if you saw a bit of innovation on the part of property portals this week, which, considering Rightmove and the like, were seen as the early prop tech adopters or the early prop tech players. In my view, over the last 10, 15 years, we've hardly seen any real prop tech innovation by those portals. You know, Zoopla obviously had a spell of doing quite a lot in terms of adding consumer-facing features, but in the last few years, it's been they've been pretty pedestrian, I think, all of the portals, in terms of doing anything different or upping their game. You know, famously, I remember when you talked to Rightmove about, I don't know, when they were going to reskin Rightmove Plus or do anything different, you know, they would laugh and say, yeah, we'll get round to that over the coming years. You know, everything used to take ages. But what was heartening to see was that on the market of all businesses, actually arguably probably the least innovative, because they are a very traditional portal, as in the way that they were founded, of course, by some very, very traditional big estate agency players. They've come out with a really interesting feature this week, Paul, which is that you can go onto On the Market and search for properties that have virtual viewings. And I thought that was really clever, really fast, really innovative. And I got a kind of off my cap, almost tip my hat for once to my old foes On the Market, that they have actually come up with something very quickly that is very usable and actually certainly quite useful from the point of view of potential buyers looking on their website, don't you think?
And what is, from you being an estate agent, Russell, I mean, what's the percentage of agents that are using, obviously, virtual viewings and that technology?
It's certainly a lot more now because of COVID, isn't it? I mean, previously, you know, a decent percentage of properties would have virtual tours and so on. I think they're definitely being promoted a lot more now because, of course, the government guidance is still that you should really look to have a virtual viewing before you go and have a physical viewing, obviously because of the social distancing protocols and so on. It was interesting. I was talking to Mark von Grunhair this week from Benham and Reeves, you know, big London estate agent, and he said, look, to be honest, we've got lots and lots of buyers and tenants, actually prospective tenants, wanting to do the whole sorry, my dog is about to appear. Hey, Muttley. Special guest, Muttley.
Special guest. We'll get him on next week.
Yeah, no, he said, but the reality is, although lots more people are clicking on virtual viewings and wanting virtual tours, the reality is most people, particularly purchasers, maybe as opposed to tenants, they still want to physically see a property. And I think we saw a lot in the beginning of lockdown, didn't we? A lot of noise being made about digital viewings and virtual tours and so on the basis that some people might be persuaded to buy a house just by looking at it on a screen. The truth is, the reality is 90% of the time that simply isn't true. That simply
but you also need to ask the agents some questions as well when you're on the viewing.
Yeah, you do. But there's nothing like it's an odd thing, isn't it? That, you know, you can see 27 pictures and a tour and a floor plan. You don't get a feel for the house. You don't get the emotion until you actually pull up outside, you look at the neighbourhood, the ambience, what's behind it, what's in front of it, the neighbours, and then you go through the door. What did they used to say? Do you remember they used to say that most buyers make up their mind about the property they buy within 3 minutes? And I remember as an agent, I mean, even back in the 80s, you know, you'd sit there taking someone's details down. You say, right, what is it you're looking for, Mr. Smith? And it's right, it must be a 3-bed and it must be 2 seconds from the local school and all that. You'd follow them up 2 or 3 days later and they bought a 2-bed that was 2 miles away. And you'd say, what's that about? And they'd say, we just fell in love with it. Head, heart. And often the heart wins. Often the heart wins.
That's a really good point, actually. I was going to mention another story, Russell, with regard to the student market, because obviously that's been affected heavily by landlords because we, you know, as I said last week, there was you know, students just refusing to pay their landlords, and there's loads of campaigns, universities telling students don't pay your landlord. I mean, it's getting really bad. And there's a big build to rent operator called Cushman and Wakefield. They do a lot of build to rent. They've got new developments in Leicester and Edinburgh, which are 100% booked out. But it's believed that for the next year, there could be 230,000 less students in our universities. and the knock-on figures-wise is like 1.5 billion for non-EUs, 350 million for EUs, and 621 million for UK students. I mean, if that is the case, there's a lot of money that's going to be lost in the economy, and obviously by landlords.
And that's interesting because Chesterton's in the last 24 hours have said, and I have to say, Chesterton's have got a bit of a PR machine going on at the moment, I think, because they keep making announcements that are kind of a little more extreme than the norm in terms of, they weren't affected by lockdown and they were still selling £5 million houses a minute or whatever it was. I'm exaggerating, but you take my point. Today they've said that they think London rent prices are down 15%. And one of the reasons, actually, to your point, that they cite is that the student rental market for now has kind of diluted somewhat. So you'd agree with that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, I think, I've said, and I said in my blog I wrote a couple of weeks ago, I do think, rents will come down a little bit, and in hand, obviously, with property prices because of the economy. We don't know this true state of how bad it's going to get. And, I know you're the ideal optimist and I'm a realist, but, when the government support stops, the furloughing, because it can't carry on forever, the last quarter of this year, the first quarter next year, we will see the reality, unfortunately, of loads of job losses.
Interesting you should say, Kate Faulkner is, chairman of the Home Buying and Selling Group. She's written to government, hasn't she, this week, which was publicised, to say, look, the furlough's great, but if the furlough comes off too early for agents, given that obviously the pipeline hasn't been topped up as far as estate and letting agents are concerned for the last couple of months, and therefore the financial pressure on agents is really going to bite come kind of September, October. Funnily enough, pretty much the same time as the Rightmove deal, inverted commas, which we'll talk about in a sec, also comes off, that we should not, as an industry, or the government should not lift the furlough, particularly where estate agents are concerned, completely, or indeed insist on employer contributions, because it will bite just at the time where estate agents need it the most.
Yeah, that's a valid point. But the argument is with the government that's going to come from every single sector.
Yeah, Yeah, but we're more, aren't we? Because if you're retail, your shop opens on the 15th of June, you will be taking money on the 15th of June. I mean, look, I'll tell you, I reckon there'll be people queuing around the block to get into Lakeside and Bluewater and Westfield. Retail is just going to explode because there's been a lot of people sitting there waiting to spend money.
There's going to be people that are fearful, Russell. They change their habits, and of course you have the social distancing, and you've got. I mean, that's a great link to my next story that I want to mention. Is British Land? We broke this. Nigel Lewis broke this on Landlord Zone. Is they had 1.1 billion pounds of losses for the year, which is 3 times more losses than a year ago. 43% of their retail rents have only been collected in March's quarter.
Yeah.
And they're really heavily exposed to retail. So, I mean, and don't forget, they would obviously the trading conditions with retailers they were struggling before this lockdown. And there's June's quarter coming out, and of course, all the shops have been closed. So, that's a big worry. Is, as I keep saying, is obviously the commercial sector.
There's a lot of retailers like New Look apparently that have just stopped paying their rent, so they didn't pay March's, they won't pay June's. Of course, legislation is on their side right now in terms of commercial landlords not being able to evict, but at the same time, they still owe that money. I mean, it's not a let off; it's a holiday effectively, whereby those landlords are prevented from evicting them, but that's all going to catch up. And yeah, look, I would not want to be an investor in a commercial property business right now, whether it was Intu, Land Securities, British Land. If voids are going to be hugely greater in terms of the gaps in tenancies, and rents are going to be squeezed, well, then as a consequence, if yields are going to be maintained, the value of those properties, and therefore the value of the companies that own those properties, is all going to reduce. And I said this months and months and months ago when we first started getting the bite from the likes of Mike Ashley. We've seen that Mike Ashley from Sports Direct was running around buying chains of businesses that were in trouble. Yeah, and I think one of the reasons he was doing it was, if you end up owning businesses that occupy 10 to 15% of Britain's high streets, you've got massive clout then as a tenant to say to the landlords, I want the rent lowered. And I think that the writing's on the wall for those shopping centres.
Well, yeah, I mean, without a doubt, rents are coming down, shorter leases. But I spoke to a really, really big property player yesterday, who I've known for a long time, and he's bought 3 commercial units during lockdown. He's been quite aggressive. I mean, the argument is, I think, and I got contacted actually by a friend of mine who's doing, he does TV production, and we were talking about ideas and stuff. I mean, is the high street going to turn into homes? You know, I mean, obviously there's real planning issues, but I think you'll start seeing that. You'll start, you know, I mean, it's all about planning, and because you are going to have a lot of empty.
I think high streets, yes, because high streets were predominantly residential 100 years ago, weren't they?
Yeah.
So, and they've obviously built up where the mix now is, of course, you know, retail. So I think offices in high streets, by way of there being permitted development that allows them to change into residential without planning permission anyway, that will happen. More retail in high streets will turn into resi, but shopping centres kind of no, because it doesn't work, does it? So I think
talking about the high streets. Yeah, yeah.
But the resi market, of course, Paul, as we've seen this week in terms of some inklings, is back on the up, mate, I have to say. And I hate to mention that £100, which seems to be, I don't know which side.
You only mentioned it 10 minutes ago. You
further from you and more over to me. We should do like a Dragon's Den thing, Paul. I think we should have the £100 on each desk, really. And every week we should move it further towards your screen or further towards my screen, depending on which way we think the market wind's blowing. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll tell you what, in week 3, I'm going to lay the gauntlet down to you, Russell.
Oh, no, you're going to double the bet?
Let's double the bet.
Done. Yeah. Okay.
Is that yes?
Really? Even though the data that I'm about, well, not the data, because there isn't much data.
May 2021.
The anecdotal evidence this week is, let me just tell you, so Zoopla are saying, and Brief Your Market, and CodeJute, who provides software to conveyancers, all saying that the market is already back to where it was pre-lockdown and higher in terms of buyer inquiries, properties being marked sold subject to contract. The likes of Stephen Hayter at My Home Move saying that they're inundated with new instructions. And that actually there's a regional fragmentation. So would you believe Portsmouth and Southampton seem to be 2 of the busiest areas of the country for revitalised activity in the property market? But it does seem all to be on the up in terms of activity. And you know, as we know, if there's huge demand, what does that lead to? Higher prices.
That's right. So do you want to double to do it?
I'm feeding my point. So I'll happily take your £200 off you and give it to...
Good.
Whatever.
The thing is, you're larging it up too early, Russell. A marathon, not a sprint. You're talking our third show, week 9 in lockdown. Yeah.
Are you trying to suggest that I'm peaking too early? Because it's funny.
Peaking too early.
Does that all the time. Anyway.
Yeah, let's not go there. Anyway, that moves us swiftly on to the foreign property story. And it's not a property story per se, it's actually about a market.
You know, I love this bit. I love this segment of the show where you do your obscure foreign property bits. What is it this week?
Well, it's not really obscure. It's very big, actually. It's the US housing market. Okay. Actually, the National Association of Realtors says that sales have dived 21.8% in April, 33% annually, recording their biggest ever plunge. And really, this is a result of now 40 million US citizens now filed for unemployment over the 10 weeks in lockdown. Not seen since the Great Depression. Only last week, 2.1 million people applied for unemployment benefit, which is now about 15% of the population.
15% unemployment.
14.7% unemployment.
So the latest numbers in the UK are 3.9%. I mean, that's going to go higher, particularly as furlough starts to be diluted.
It won't go as high as 14%.
I don't think they have a furlough scheme in the US. I mean, thank goodness that the UK has a furlough scheme. So Sunak. Wow. I mean, look, the numbers are big. Don't forget that the US population is 4 times bigger than the UK. So they've got 260, 270 million people. But that's, and they've got a mad president, which really doesn't help.
He's a businessman. He knows how to make money, Russell.
He's bankrupt 17 times, isn't he? No, that is very concerning. And I guess you could argue, I'll help you out a little bit here, that what happens in the US tends to ripple to the UK. I mean, certainly the financial crisis started with the likes of
2008
in 2007, didn't it? So look, I'm still confident that won't happen in the UK, but it's not good news, mate. It's not good news.
Yeah, no. Okay. So look, we've covered the foreign property. What about, I think we're coming towards the end of the show. What about our prize property plum of the week? Now, you've always got something under your hat. What have you got this week?
My prize property plum, our prize property plum. So I'm going to have to share my screen, if I may. Can I?
Yeah.
I think this worked last time we did this, so let's just make sure I can do this. Bear with me. Has that worked, Paul?
Yes, I can see a beautiful house.
This is courtesy of Property Industry Iron, our friends there, but actually also courtesy of The Sun, right? So this is an article that made The Sun newspaper, which you would normally think would be a good thing for an estate agent. But for our friends here at Purple Bricks, I'm going to call you out, Purple Bricks. You are our Prize Property Plumb of the week. For this, can you see these pictures? Right, so I shouldn't laugh. I do feel sorry for the owner. So this property is in Canterbury, listed by Purple Bricks a few days ago. And these are the pictures that the local property expert took, showing the, I mean, in fact, do you remember the young ones, Paul, back in the 80s?
Yes, it looks like the young ones who live there.
It does. It looks like Rick Mail and Aid Edmondson and Nigel Planer have lived in this place.
Yeah.
And the LPE's just kind of got out of his car, walked in and thought, oh, well, and just taken the pictures and then listed the thing on Rightmove. Agents that are critical of Purple Bricks will be watching this and looking at these pictures now and thinking, yeah, actually, this is why Purple Bricks are characterised as a listing agent, not an estate agent, because they've been paid £1,000 for this listing anyway. So do they really give a toss whether the thing sells or not? I think this is, I mean, we're laughing, but I think this is disgraceful. That the agent,
if I was a homeowner and I saw that.
So maybe it's a student home, maybe it's a rental, whatever. But as the agent, if you were earning a £3 or £4 fee, you as an agent would think, I'm going to have to spend half an hour clearing this up, but I'm going to spend half an hour clearing it up because I want the pictures to be decent. Let me just see if I can scroll down a bit. Look, this has only just gone on the market. Bear in mind, we're in May. Look, Christmas tree on the floor still. Well, I'd love to meet the people that live here, wouldn't you? The state of the place. Look, I mean, it's...
It looks like they might have featured on my TV programme.
Well, yeah, you may well have...
Oh, my God, look at the garden.
You may well have slung people out of this place, Paul. Look, they're still watering the bath. No one could even bother to take the bloody plug. Unbelievable. So, look, I think a worthy Prize Property Plumb.
Yes.
Purple Bricks and their Canterbury LPE, whoever you are, by all means contact me to defend yourself if there was some reason why you couldn't roll your sleeves up and move these pots of paint and the ironing and all the crap that is in this property. He's probably going to contact us now and say, yeah, but I sold it for the asking price 24 hours later. If so,
it'd be good to know.
I still reserve my criticism because it's a really poor show, and this is why estate agents get criticised. So yeah, there you have it, mate. So good. So look, let's speak next week. There'll be lots to talk about next week. We'll have the nationwide numbers to speak about, which I'm sure will show a lovely, comfortable increase in house prices month on month, and we'll move that pile of 200 quid more and more over to my side of the table, Paul.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. I've got to keep telling you that, Russell. You know, you're peaking too early, mate. All right.
Indeed. All right, mate. Well, look, it's been good talking to you. Have a
Brilliant.
Good one. Yeah, enjoy your weekend. Speak to you all next week.
You too. Take care.
Cheers, guys.